Okay, so let's start today's class. So we are talking about the synchronous flip-flop. So the synchronous flip-flop, and it is also called as the parallel flip-flop, parallel counters. And here the clock input is very important, and all the states of flip-flops changes with respect to the clock only. Okay. So a state will change of a flip-flop of a particular flop when the clock is there. Okay. So even the input of the flip-flop may change, but the state will change only when clock comes. That's to be remembered. Okay. This is to be remembered. And for this reason, synchronous flip-flop, as I told in the previous class, synchronous flip-flop requires more circuitry than the asynchronous flip-flop. Okay. So this is the circuit operation, but we will get directly go to the circuit instead of reading this. And this is the circuit diagram. Okay. So this is the diagram of 4-bit synchronous counter, where A, B, C, D four flip-flops are there. Okay, so flip-flop A is the LSB flip-flop. Okay, and so this is the LSB flip-flop, and this is D is the MSB flip-flop. So by the output we will give the name ABCD. Okay, so A is the LSB flip-flop. Okay, so what happens when the clock comes? Okay, so here we don't have a waveform. We can draw it, but may not be that good like that. Okay, I'm trying to draw it. Okay, so let's say this is clock. Okay, let's say this is clock. Okay, so let's say this is clock, and you can see that the flip flop A, both the inputs are connected to 1. Okay, so both the inputs of only A are connected to 1. Okay, but you can see the flip flop B, C, D, they are not connected to 1. Okay, although in the asynchronous, you would remember that in asynchronous, all the inputs of all flip flops were connected to 1. But here only the first flip flop, that is the A, is connected to 1. Okay. So what is the meaning of 1? So it acts as a T flip flop. Okay. And what is T flip flop? When the both the inputs are connected together and they are connected to 1. So it will act as a toggle flip flop. And what it does, at each clock A will change. Okay, so we can see from here the clock is negative H. The clock is negative H clock. So for at each negative edge of the clock, the A input will change. Okay. So this is the case for the LSB. LSB changes at each transition. Okay, so this is the case for LSB. So A will change at the negative edge of each clock. Okay. So if I draw input A, let me change this. Yeah. So A initially was 0, it will be 0, but as soon as the negative edge of the clock comes, it would become 1. And it will remain 1 unless the until the negative edge of the clock comes again. Okay? So at negative edge is changed from low to high, and it will remain high until the next clock comes. Okay, so because the negative edge clock is there, so again negative edge comes and it would become 0. Then it would remain 0, and as soon as the negative edge comes, it would change to high, and it will remain high. Then negative edge, low, high, again low, like that. This would continue. So this is flip flop A. Okay, I hope this is clear to everyone. So A is changing at each clock. Okay, whenever the clock is there, A is changing. Means for each negative edge of the clock, A is changing. Now, I think the variation of A is clear to everyone. This is similar to a synchronous counter. There is nothing different from the synchronous counter. Now, if we talk about input B, okay, we talk about the flip flop B. Okay, so you can see that in the flip flop B, J and K are connected together. Okay, one thing, but they are connected to A. Okay, J are connected together, but they are connected to A. In the synchronous, the output A was going to the flip flop, but here flip flop clock. But here they are, it is going directly to the flip flop. So what it mean? What it mean that when A will be high, when A will be high, at that time only it will change. Okay, when A is high, when A is high, only at that time the input B will change. Okay, so what we can see from here, like B will be 0. Now A is high. Okay, A is high, but B will not change here. Why? Because before this line, before this line, before this line, A was 0 and clock came, A become 1. Okay, so A is now 1 here. Okay, but the clock has passed. Okay, so this can change only at the clock, not before the clock. Okay, so what happens? The negative edge of the clock comes here, and at this time the A again is high. So at this time when A is high and the clock comes, so the B will change to high state. Okay, B will change to high state, and A is changing to low state. Okay. A changed to low and B become high. So it was 1. As soon as the second clock came, so second clock made this A to 0 and made this B to 1. Because the inputs to B was 1. Okay, and inputs to A was also 1. Okay, so A is will toggle to high to low, and B will toggle to low to high. Okay, so remember this. In this, all the actions take place at the edge of the clock. All the changes will take place at the edge of the clock. In the previous synchronous diagram, you can see that A was acting as a clock. So when A negative edge comes, it changes. But here the negative A is important because A was high. But this would change only when the A clock is negative edge of the clock appears. Okay, remember this thing importantly. Okay, so this would remain high till what time? So now you can see the input A has changed to 0. Okay, input A is changed to 0. So J and K both are 0. Okay. And now the third A negative edge of the clock comes. Okay. So in the JK flip-flop, if you remember, if both the inputs are 0, the state remains same. The state of the JK flip-flop does not change if both the inputs are 0. So J and K both are 0. Okay. So you can see that here A is 0. It means that for B the inputs are 0. Okay. So the inputs are 0 in the second condition. So the inputs are 0 and the clock comes. Okay. So A is 0 and this point the clock appears here. Okay. In this line you can see the clock appears and A is in the 0 state. So A is 0 and the clock appears means the input to B will remain same. So there will be no changes in B. Okay. B will remain same. Next, again, now A became high. As soon as A became high and the clock comes, so when the clock comes, A is high and the clock comes again. This will toggle the flip flop B. So now we will go to the low state. Okay. Again the clock comes. A is low. A is low and the clock comes. So what will happen to B? B will remain 0 because we have already told you when the inputs of the JK flip-flop are 0. So in that case, this will be remain 0. There will be no change. Okay, so the clock comes, low inputs is there, so it will remain 0. Okay, then sorry, I have made some wrong. So and this would remain 0. Now again you can see here the A is high and the clock comes. Okay, so since A is high and the clock comes, what will happen? It will toggle the so this A will be high. So this state will be there. A is high and clock comes. What will happen? The A B will become high. B will toggle. So like this will be the waveform of B. Okay, this would be the waveform of B. Now we talk about C. Okay, I hope I could have drawn even a bigger waveform because सारी states इसमें दिखाई नहीं देगी. Okay, so now we talk about C. I think till B is clear, operation is clear. How B is changing and how A is changing. I think this operation is clear to everyone. Okay, if you want, I'll repeat it. Okay, yes, thank you. So now you can see that for the B, A was acting as input. Okay, and when A is high and clock comes, B was changing state. When A is low and the clock comes, B was remaining at the same state. It is not changing the state. Now we talk about C. Okay, so as I told you that state of each flip flop will change by the at the time of clock only. Okay, so now you can see how the flip flop C is connected. Input A and B are connected to a AND gate. Okay, and their output A and B is connected to the input of C. Input of C. Okay, so both the inputs J and K are connected and they are connected to A into B. It means that when A into B is 1 and the clock comes, when A and B both are 1 and the clock comes, what will happen? C will change the state. When A or B, anyone is 0 and the clock comes, C will remain in the previous state. Whatever was the previous state, C will remain in that state. Okay. So if I draw C, I draw C, so what will happen? So A and B are initially 0, and both and the clock is 0. At this point in this line, you can see A is changing to 1, no change in C. Now here you can see A is 1, A is 1, B is 0, okay, and the clock is appearing. Okay, clock will appear at this point. So at this point A was 1, B was 0. So A is 1, B is 0, A into B will be 0. So since 0, so, and the clock comes, state of C will remain same. There will be no change in the state of C. So it will remain 0. Okay. Again at this third clock, you can see that A is 0, B is 1, A is 0, and B is 1, A is 0 here, B is 1, B is 1 here. So in that case, A into B will be 0. Now you can see, okay, so here also it will remain 0. Here you can see that A is 1, B is 1, and the clock comes here. Okay, so at this line you can see A, A is 1, B is 1, and clock comes. So at this point C will change to the high state. C will change state to high state. Okay, C will change state to high state. So this is like 0 0. Okay, this is 1 0 0 1. D मैंने नहीं बनाया है, ठीक है, and this is how C would change state. अब देखिए आगे C कहाँ पर state change करेगा. ठीक है, अब देखिए दोनों 0 हो गए. ठीक है, A और B दोनों 0 हो गए. So B is A is 0, B is 0, A into B is 0, and clock comes here. Clock comes at this point. Clock comes. So what will happen? A is 0 and B is 0. The state of C will not change, because if the inputs to the JK flip-flops are 0, then the state of JK flip-flop does not change. Let's move further. Again at this clock age, what happens? A is 1, A is 1 and B was 0. Again here the state will remain same. Okay. So now you can see in this age of the clock, A is 1 and B is 0. The output will remain A into B will be 0. The output will remain same. Okay. And in this clock, negative edge clock comes, A is 0. A is 0 means it will not change the state of B. The B will remain same and the C will also remain same. Okay. तो यहाँ पर मेरे पास थोड़ी जगह कम पड़ गई है, थोड़ा मुझे और I could have taken a more place from left side. Okay. So if you don't mind and understand the thing, so I can draw the waveform, continue the waveform from here. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So like clock is here. So after this clock, after this point, suppose the clock starts from here. Okay. So let me draw it. Use the same color as I used previously. Okay. And a red. Yeah. Okay, this waveform is continuation from right side. So don't confuse. So as soon as this negative edge of the clock came, means this edge A was 0 and this edge came this age comes, so what will happen? A will change to high state. At the negative age again, A would change to high state, again high, change. Okay, so दो तीन साइकिल और बना लिए हैं. Okay. Now what will happen? So B was 1. So at this point A is changed to high. So A B will remain. B was at high level. Okay. So B will remain same. At this clock B will remain same. But here you can see that B was high. Okay, so this is the high level of B. So B was high, and here the clock comes and A is high. So B will toggle. So B will toggle to low state, and B will remain in the low state. Okay, because A is 0 here, A is 0 here, and the clock comes. So when A is 0, the state is maintained. So this will remain in the same state. When now what happens? This clock comes. Okay, so A is high, B will toggle the state. Okay, now A is low, clock comes, B will remain in the same state. Okay, let's talk about C. C. Yes. Okay, so what about C? So C was in the high state. Okay, C was in the high state. So here A is 0, B is 0. So C was in the high state, no change in the state. Okay, now you can see at this point, here the second edge of the clock, A is high, B is high. It means the C will change the state. Now the C was in the high state, C would go into the low state. Okay, C would go into the low state. Again, C will remain in this state. Okay, unless both A and B becomes high. So A and B where both are high at this clock edge. So here both are high, and this would make C2 high. Okay. And now we try to draw the D waveform. Okay. Now you can see the D. What is D? Say you can see that this process is the continuation. Okay. हम previous inputs को क्या कर रहे हैं? दोनों को एक AND गेट से पास करके नेक्स्ट फ्लिप फ्लॉप के इनपुट्स में अप्लाई कर दे रहे हैं. तो देखिए A और B थे, इन दोनों पहले A अकेला इनपुट था, अब इसको AND गेट से लगाओ या डायरेक्टली लगा दो तो एक ही बात है. ए को हमने डायरेक्टली बी में कनेक्ट कर दिया. अब दो इनपुट हो गए, ए और बी फ्लिप फ्लॉप निकल चुके हैं पीछे, तो ए और बी को एक एंड गेट से पास किया और सी में अप्लाई कर दिया. उनका एंड वर्जन जो है ए इंटू बी, उसको हमने किया ए एंड बी, उसको हमने क्या किया सी में एज ए इनपुट दे दिया. अब हम डी फ्लिप फ्लॉप पर जा रहे हैं, तो क्या हुआ कि प्रीवियस कितने फ्लिप फ्लॉप हो गए? 3 हो गए, सी बी ए. तो उन तीनों के इनपुट कॉम्बिनेशन को हमने ए बी सी को एक एंड गेट से पास किया और डी फ्लिप फ्लॉप को दे. ठीक है, डी फ्लिप फ्लॉप को हमने दे दिया है. क्या होगा? से ए विल चेंज. ओके, सो अब डी की स्टेट कब चेंज होगी? डी की स्टेट देखिए, इनिशियली अगर कोई भी नहीं है इनमें से ए बी सी में से एक भी जीरो है, तो आउटपुट क्या रहेगा? डी हमेशा जीरो रहेगा. डी का आउटपुट कब वन होगा? जब तीनों ए बी सी तीनों हाई हो, तो इसका आउटपुट वन हो, तभी क्या है जे एंड के टॉगल करता है. ठीक है, जे एंड के टॉगल कब करता है? जब दोनों इनपुट हाई हो. जे के कनेक्टेड करके वन से कनेक्ट कर दिया, तो दोनों इनपुट हाई हो गए हैं और क्लॉक आ रही हो. So, so it was D was in the zero state. So D was in the zero state. So D will remain zero. This is D. मैं वो स्टेट देखना है जब तीनों एक साथ हाई हो और क्लॉक अपीयर हो रही हो. तो देखिए यहाँ पर कहीं भी ऐसा नहीं है. C0 है, B1 है, A0 है, तो इन तीनों का एंड क्या होगा? जीरो होगा. चलिए आगे चलते हैं. ठीक है, यहाँ वही है, जीरो है, सी जीरो है, बी वन है, ए वन है, तब भी कोई फायदा नहीं होगा। चलिए आगे चलते हैं। ठीक है, यहाँ पर सी वन है, बी जीरो है, ए जीरो है, तब भी एंड गेट जीरो, एंड जीरो रहेगा। यहाँ पर देखिए ए वन है, बी जीरो है, सी वन है, तब भी एंड जीरो रहेगा। तो यहाँ पर ए में कोई चेंज, सी में और डी में चेंज कोई नहीं आएगा। अब यहाँ पर देखिए, इस पॉइंट पर देखिए, ओके, इससे पहले यहाँ पर अगर हम देखेंगे तो क्या है, इस लाइन पर हम देखेंगे तो क्या है, ए है जीरो, बी है वन और सी है वन। ओके, बी एंड सी आर वन एंड ए is zero, so the AND gate will be zero, AND operation will be zero. So C is one, B is one and A is zero, so the resultant is zero. Okay, so at this clock there will be no change. Now we come to this clock. So when A is 1, B is 1, C is 1, and now you can see that the D was 0, and here D can change to, when all three are 1, then D can change to state to high. Okay, so this waveform only covers operation up to. Okay, I hope this waveform is clear. How I have drawn this waveform, this is clear to all of you. Okay, okay. So now we talk directly here. Okay, so after this, ABC, when the ABC was 1, it changed state to the high, okay, low to high. Okay, so it will remain 0, it will remain in the high state, sorry, D flip flop will remain in the high state until J and K becomes 1 again. Okay, means A and ABC becomes 1 again. Okay, so it will remain in the high state whenever until the ABC becomes 1. Okay, so after this you can see that all the flip flop change state. Okay, यहाँ के बाद A जीरो हो गया, B भी जीरो हो गया और C भी जीरो हो गया। तो हमें ये कौन सा इनपुट मिल गया, 1 0 0, 1 0 0 वाला हमें आउटपुट हमें यहाँ से मिल गया। ठीक है, फिर यहाँ से क्या मिल रहा है, 1 0, हाँ ये है 1, नंबरिंग को थोड़ा दूसरे कलर से करता हूँ, या 1 0 0 1, यहाँ पर क्या था 1, ये ठीक है, यहाँ पर क्या था 1 0 0 0। ठीक है, इससे पहले यहाँ पर क्या था 0 1 1 and 1। Okay, so this is like counter, it's counting the state, changing the state, जैसे आप बाइनरी में काउंटिंग होती है, so it's going in the similar fashion. Okay, I hope you understand this. I hope you understand this. So I'm going to clear all these drawings. Okay, okay, so now the things are clear. Okay, so where we were what we were discussing was this. Okay, so where the D flip flop is changing the states. Okay, so you can see from count up to 0 to 7. Okay, from 0 to up to 7, the D flip flop was in the 0 state. Okay, so you can see that D flip flop was in the 0 state, and 0 up to 7 can be counted by uh, ABC, and you can see up to 7 ABC all together, none of these are 1. When we reach to the 7, at that point of time A, B and C are 1. Okay, So only at this point A, B, C are 1. So when these three are 1 and when these three are 1 and the clock comes, so what will happen? The state of D will change, and now you can see the D is at some other. Now from here, so there D was 0, and now from this point you can see that D has changed state to high, and so these three were ABC was 1. So these three ABC was 1, and the clock comes. This A will D will become high. Okay, and their states is decided by their previous states. Okay, so A was high. So the clock. So in the previous state, the A was high. Clock comes. A becomes 0. Okay, so A was high. A was in the high state. It may be problem at your end, Adiba. So A was in the high state. Okay, so this is A. I'm just showing one diagram here. Okay, how all these states change. So the clock comes here. So this is the clock. मैं सिर्फ एक स्टेट दिखाना चाह रहा हूँ जहाँ पर ये एकदम से में चेंज हो गए. सो ए हाई था, सॉरी क्लॉक है ये ए हाई है. ए हाई स्टेट में था और बी भी हाई स्टेट में था. क्लॉक कम्स, ए चेंजेस टू ग्राउंड. ओके, सो ए भी हाई था, तो क्या होगा जैसे जेके का फ्लिप फ्लॉप भी हाई स्टेट पर है, तो क्या होगा क्लॉक आते ही ये भी टॉगल कर जाएगा. सो बी विल आल्सो गो टू द लोअर स्टेट. बी विल आल्सो चेंज द स्टेट. Since A and B both were high, so A into B will be high, and JK inputs is 1, so, and the clock comes, so this will also change to the lowest state. So the C will also change to the lowest state. And when all these three were high and D was low, okay, so all three were high and the clock comes, so what will happen? These three were high, A, B, C were 1, and the clock comes, so D will change to the high state. So this is how it happened in the this transition point. I hope you understand this working of this circuit. So remember, if you want to continue for like this is for 4 bit, if you want to continue for the higher bits, you have to connect it with similar AND gates for the. If I make it for the fifth flip flop, so how the inputs will be for that next flip flop? If I make it suppose E, if I add here E, okay, so what will be the inputs to this? Okay, definitely clock will be there. You cannot deny clock. So clock will be there. Clock will be there. What about J and K? So J will be here and K will be here, and these two will be connected, and they will be connected to a, sorry, they will be connected to a AND gate. And what will be the inputs of this AND gate? AND gate's input will be ABC, okay, and then D will also be there. Make it like this, okay. ABC आप A B C को अलग अलग अप्लाई करिए, A B C एक साथ अप्लाई कर दिए, यहाँ पर कोई ज़्यादा फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा एंड ऑपरेशन में. ठीक है, तो इसका ई आउटपुट जो ये ई का इनपुट जो है ये 1 कब होगा? जब ए बी सी भी 1 हो और डी भी 1 हो, तभी ये चेंज होगा. तो यहाँ पर आंसर इसका आउटपुट क्या आएगा? यहाँ का इसका आउटपुट होगा इसका आउटपुट क्या होगा? ए बी सी डी, सॉरी हाँ, इस एंड गेट का आउटपुट ए बी सी डी होगा. और ये एज इनपुट ई में जाएगा। जैसे ये आप इसको कंटिन्यू कर सकते हैं। हाँ, जोवा ने सही जवाब दिया था, ABCD इसका output was and here. I hope you understood the working of this synchronous counter, and you can see that in the previous synchronous counter you does not require any external circuit unless you want to reduce the count. अगर आपको पूरा काउंट करना है तो आपको कुछ भी नहीं चाहिए, कोई भी एक्सटर्नल गेट नहीं चाहिए, कितना ही बड़ा फ्लिप फ्लॉप आप बना, कितना ही बड़ा काउंटर आप बना लें, it doesn't require any external हार्डवेयर एक्सेप्ट दीज फ्लिप फ्लॉप्स। ठीक है, तो एक्स्ट्रा हार्डवेयर की जरूरत नहीं है वहां पर, बट हियर वी रिक्वायर एक्स्ट्रा हार्डवेयर। Okay, so in this I think no problem to anyone. अगर हम डिले की बात करें भी, तो देखते हैं नेक्स्ट। Okay, so all the this waveform will come here. So आप किसी भी स्टेट पर लेकर के बनाना शुरू कर सकते हैं। ठीक, तो ये बात बस इतनी बात बस याद रखिएगा, क्लॉक जिस पॉइंट पर आ रही है उससे पहले स्टेट क्या है किसी इनपुट की, ठीक है, वो डिसाइड करेगा। ठीक है, और जब हम दूसरे के बारे में बात करेंगे, जब हम बी के बारे में ऐसे बात कर रहे हैं, ठीक है, तो जब क्लॉक सेकंड क्लॉक आ रही है, जो भी क्लॉक आ रही है, उस वक्त उस इंस्टेंट पर क्लॉक आने से पहले इसका इनपुट क्या है वो डिसाइड करेगा। क्लॉक आने से पहले अगर ये हाई स्टेट पर है तो क्लॉक आने से पहले ही इसको टॉगल कर देगा, और ये लो स्टेट पर है पहले, हो सकता है क्लॉक के साथ ये भी चेंज हो जाए, लेकिन क्लॉक आने से पहले इसकी स्टेटस क्या है वो मैटर करेगा, ये बात याद रखिएगा, क्लॉक आने के पहले। ठीक है, हो सकता है क्लॉक आने से ए भी चेंज हो जाए, ठीक है, लेकिन क्लॉक आने से पहले ए हाई था तो ये इसको भी चेंज, इस पर भी इफेक्ट पड़ेगा, ये बात याद रखिएगा, आप इसको कंफ्यूजन मत करिएगा, क्लॉक आने से पहले। Okay. So this is the mode 16 counter. You can remember this. So I'll give these slides. In fact, this is directly from the book. Because the sufficient theory is there, you can understand what I told in my words is written in this theory, so you can understand it. Okay, so it's prompt for the time limit. So I think the time for the today class is almost over.